Hey, everybody, welcome in. It's another episode of the Just College Hoop Show. I'm Brian McLaughlin here with Tim Leonard. Tim, all of a sudden, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, there was no football on Saturday, so people were tweeting it's college basketball season. I know you and I have been locked in for the last couple of months, but fun to kind of have some of the national people who are so focused on football all of a sudden paying a little bit of attention to our sport that we've been locked into. And so it's kind of fun to see their reactions to who's ranked where, what their opinions are on the sport, and kind of how they differ to those of us who have maybe been watching for the last few months. It's that time of year where you have to kind of balance those two things out, the opinions of others and what we've been thinking kind of all season. Excited to break it all down with you today.
Yeah, welcome to any football fans. We welcome you, even though you might not be as locked in as we are at the start of the season. But yeah, if you're just tuned into college hoops, I would imagine the AP top 25 and everything is kind of a head spinner because it just feels like a lot of these teams that we are expecting to be at the top have slipped up. I was watching Marquette the other night. I was trying to figure out, why aren't they the title contenders they were last year? And you could go on and on down the list. Michigan State's playing some better basketball recently, but it feels like there are some teams that were picked to be AP top 15, AP top 10 that are hovering around the bubble. And then there's the reverse of that, where you've got the Mountain West playing great and a lot of those great storylines, a lot of great players in the Mountain West. So it's been a fascinating year of college basketball, but we are kind of at that point now where it feels like college basketball is gathering a little bit more eyeballs. We've kind of crossed over into the really past the midseason point officially, and now it's like, okay, we're starting to see these storylines form into what will be March storylines as well, which is exciting.
There's a big weekend ahead, and the Duke North Carolina game is always going to be the headliner any weekend that those two teams play. But there's also some massive games in the SEC and in the Big 12 coming up on Saturday that we'll break down later in the show. I think a lot of people kind of consider that Duke North Carolina, okay, whenever those two play for the first time, that's really when it feels like the meat of college basketball season it has arrived. And so I think it's definitely that time of year. We're going to kind of start our show today in the Big 12. We'll get to that ACC massive showdown in a bit. We've got a lot to talk about in the Big East as well. If anybody's been following kind of some Twitter drama that's been unfolding across the Big East recently, shout out Providence and Ed Cooley one time. But let's start, Tim, with the game of the night last night, in my opinion. Houston, Texas. They go to overtime, and Houston just finds a way to win. They do it again on the road. And this Houston team, they're still, I think, at least Ken Pom have them number one, still loved by the computers and the metrics, but they're sitting at fourth in the AP poll. They're a team that right now, I think they have established themselves as one of these. You can kind of, I think everyone agrees on who the top four teams are right now. You've got UConn, you've got Purdue, you've got Houston, and then I think North Carolina have played their way kind of into that mix. Houston, you look at them, they're probably the least talented, but those dudes are tough. They just find ways to win, Tim. And that's a really, I think, like they're a team that if I had to pick a team to win a close game right now, it's going to be hard for me not to lean on that Houston group and the way they just are able to battle and find ways to win. They do it last night in overtime on the road against Texas.
Yeah, great game last night. Really back and forth, had a lot of swings to it. It was funny. I caught myself kind of watching that game thinking, man, this is just Big 12 basketball. This is great. And then I was like, wait a second. These teams have never been in the same conference before until this year. And now they're just not going to be in the same conference again next year. Like, this is the one year we get Houston, Texas as a
Wow,
conference
that's a great
rivalry.
point.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
Huh.
But it did feel like a Big 12 game, and it felt like a Houston type of game that they kind of don't do anything to wow you, but they make the right plays. Jamal Shed was excellent, and he's probably, if anything, underrated. Just such a leader for that team. I would say honestly, Brian, he should be in the conversation. I think he is in the conversation, but to me, he should be the favorite for defensive player of the year. After watching the game last night, I know that sometimes our mind goes towards the big guys for defensive player of the year and who's racking up the blocks. And there's a lot of players that you could name off the top of your head that are really helping out because there are a lot of great post players in college basketball right now. But Chet is just so Houston, like 6'1", lanky, athletic, does the little things, heart, hustle, and he's an underrated offensive player as well. I think he's right up there
Bucket.
in terms of efficiency in offense. He just doesn't really score a ton because they kind of share the basketball and they don't really score a ton, frankly. But I came away very impressed with Houston last night, and I think Shed should be in the National Defensive Player of the Year conversation for sure.
Jamal Shed, I'm right there with you as far as National Defensive Player of the Year conversation. But last night it was his offense that
Yeah.
carried Houston when normally they rely a lot on LJ Cryer's shot creation and his ability to make jump shots, and then they can get it down low to their big guys in Roberts and Francis. And it was kind of like Francis ends up kind of battling a little bit of foul trouble, ends up fouling out, which so did Jamal Shed in overtime, ends up fouling out of the game. But Shed was great. Cryer does end up finishing with 14 points, but when he goes 2 of 9 from three, that's when their offense can feel a little bit like there's just some lack of firepower. But Shed was making tough mid-range pull-ups. He was getting to the rim. He knocked down some threes. It was a real just, okay, get on my back. I'm going to carry us to this win performance from Shed, which it's good news for Houston that he can do that because he doesn't have to do that every night. But it's good that he has that ability in these closely contested Big 12 games. And I mean, respect to Texas for their ability to battle, but they are clearly not quite the same Texas team that they were last year. And they're a really good team. Max Asmus is still a really fun scorer to watch, especially when he and Shed are kind of playing one-on-one. But it doesn't feel like Texas is quite that same national title or even Big 12 contender that they were a year ago when Rodney Terry was the interim guy and then got elevated to the full-time head coaching spot. Feels like they are still a tier below Houston at this point in that Big 12 race.
Yeah, they were playing without Tyrese Hunter last night, which certainly didn't help. But
Good
I'm
point.
with you. I'm kind of disappointed in Texas a little bit. I think they have a little bit more talent and just guys that all college basketball fans know, veteran guys that have been around, Dylan Dessou, Max A. Smiths. I mean, Kadeen Shedrick transfers in from Virginia. Like they have a lot of bodies and a lot of talent on that team. And it just hasn't quite clicked yet. I think they'll be fine because they are in the Big 12. So their resume, even though they have a fair amount of losses to this point in the season, should shape up good enough to make the tournament in March because playing in that conference helps you so much. And we've talked a lot about that. I really am fascinated though by Houston because it's just like the exact opposite of some of these other teams that are really good this year. Like I think of Kentucky, who we talked about when we had the title conversation. They're so offensive minded. And there's been a lot of chatter every year we've done this podcast about how I think that Ken Palm defense is one of those stats that's almost imperative for you to make a run in March. I think it's 22nd ranked Ken Palm D was the Kentucky team that won it all, the freshman laden team in 2015. And that is the worst defensive team in the Ken Palm era, which goes back to 1999 in terms of a national title winner and what they ranked on defensive efficiency on Ken Palm. So it's going to be interesting because I remember that Houston team, I think it was 2 years ago, they lost to Villanova in the Elite Eight, and it was like a 50-40 game or something like that. I could pull it up, but it was just like,
Sick.
yeah, they just couldn't score, right? And Jamal Shebb was on that team, and he was a big part of it. And that's the concern with Houston. But at the same time, this defensive team is even better than that team. And they're just so historically great defensively that I do think they're going to be a really tough out, obviously, when we get to March.
When you're kind of looking at them as you're also looking at the other top teams in the country, Purdue, UConn, UNC, if you're just kind of evaluating that top four, there's a lot to like about all of those teams, of course. Purdue's ability to score with Edie, UConn is as balanced as it gets. They are a very good defensive team in their own right, especially when Klingon's out there. And then UNC are kind of the trendy team right now. They are on the up. They're playing really good basketball. And so there's a lot to like about all of them. But if you asked me to evaluate those four teams and pick one of them to kind of the quote everybody says or the cliche is who would you go to war with? I would go to war with Houston. Like that's the team
Yeah.
that I would want to kind of buckle up and say, you know what? I'm ready to battle with these guys. And they aren't the most, they're not the most well coached. They're probably not the most talented. They're not the most offensively skilled, but man, that defense and their ability to just hang around games when their offense isn't going. And then when their offense is going, they do have the ability to put away good teams and do it on the road. that to me is something that I'm attracted to it and is something that I'm gonna really gravitate towards come, I think, like you said, to the point about March success. I do think that there's something to that as far as I don't think they're a team. Now, I'm probably shouldn't go out on a ledge like this. I don't think they're going to get upset early because of that defense. Whereas
Yeah.
I think that they're a team that I think has a higher floor due to that defense than maybe some of the volatile offenses do.
Yeah, that's a good point. The other thing is though, like I worry if they get down by 8 points, 10 points, then do they panic? Do they have enough offensive options like in the
Can
right
they
type
stay
of
patient
matchup?
enough and yeah, can they
Yeah,
stay patient for 5 minutes and rely on their defense and chip away? I think they can,
I
but that
think they
is the
can
worry.
too. Yeah, I think they're a little bit like the Virginia teams when Tony Bennett was really humming, where you worry, okay, they're not really blowing teams out. They're kind of keeping them around, and they're doing it so much with defense that if you get down, I mean, I think even of the NFL conference championship games this weekend, I know a lot of the storyline coming
Mhm.
off of this is look at what happened to the Ravens when they got down. They kind of panicked. They went away from who they were. Totally different sport, of course, but you can be a really great team, and then when you get punched in the mouth and you're down, and then the sphincters start to tighten and everything, all of a sudden it's like, uh-oh, this is not the Houston team we've seen this season. Now, I think they have been in some of those scenarios even last night. They get down to Texas, and they just seem really tough, really veteran laden, making the right plays. I think it was sort of like you can make a case the refs were maybe a little too involved in the game last night, but that's sort of besides the point. It's just that's Houston basketball. They make it physical, they make it ugly.
You're gonna
And
feel them.
exactly. And you're right. They're not the most talented team, but I do think they're really well coached. I mean, I just think they have such a style that they stick to every year that at this point we have to, even though it's not the prettiest style, we have to acknowledge it is working and it is working really well. And yeah, have they been unbelievable in March? No, but I mean, for Houston, I think they've been pretty solid. And if anything, they have exceeded expectations in March for me. I mean, Final Four,
Yeah.
loss to Baylor was tough, but they made it to the Final Four. Losing to Villanova in the Elite Eight, I shouted out. That's not great, but they made it to the Elite Eight. Last year, I think they lost to Miami, and that was kind of a tough one. But overall, they've been there, and if you could stack them up with Gonzaga or I don't know, any of these other programs that are consistently in the top 25 right now, I don't think they're an outlier in terms of March success.
Well, speaking of sphincters tightening, their matchup on Saturday is with the Kansas Jayhawks, who have lost now two of their last three. And we've given Bill Self so much praise on this show specifically. The team that has historically ran the Big 12, all of a sudden, Tim, looks as vulnerable as I can remember. And this is a team that you and I loved, at least I loved in the preseason. The addition of Hunter Dickinson around Kevin McCullough, two guys who are still playing really well, but the team is not winning. Feels like kind of the opposite of Houston to me, where like that team to me has so much talent and they are coached by such a legend and they have had so much postseason success in the past. But right now, they just don't look like that Kansas team of years past. It's going to be fascinating when they do play Houston on Saturday. They have a get right game tonight against Oklahoma State, but Kansas again coming off another brutal loss. I know it's at Iowa State on the road. Iowa State's a really good team, but that loss at West Virginia is a bad one. And they didn't exactly handle Cincinnati with that much authority over the weekend. Are we worried about Kansas right now?
Yeah, I am worried. I don't think I had them in my title tier. I think they were like an honorable mention when we ranked the top five a couple weeks ago, and they haven't played any different since then. If anything, it's been worse. So there's no reason to put them in that title tier for me right now. They're just not deep
I
enough.
had them third and I would drop them out for the
Yeah,
record.
I think look, it's tough. I mean, they're on the fringes, and we've talked about there's not a huge drop off between those teams that we just listed at the top four and them, but they're just really completely the thinnest team out of that title group. I mean, they only really play six guys. I've been impressed with Johnny Furpey and how he has impacted the team since he started, and that's been kind of a revelation for them. He's not a great defender, but he's scoring and
He
he's
can
opened
shoot
some
it.
things up. Yeah, he's a fun guy to watch play for sure, and I think he's helped them. But it's McCullough, it's Dickinson, and it's kind of like they need them every single night. And you worry, okay, if you're playing 6 games against good teams in a row in an NCAA tournament setting, chances are Dickinson's going to be in foul trouble one night. Dickinson's going to be off one night. McCullough's going to be off. Like if one of those guys gets in foul trouble, they are really scraping the barrel. I know there's longer breaks in the NCAA tournament, so you get more rest time, and sometimes that helps out the thinner teams that don't play 7, 8 deep. So I've never really been subscribed to the theory that you have to be like 9, 10 deep, because I feel like if anything, your rotation shortens in the tournament. But they
Correct.
just really lack anything after McCullough and Dickinson right now, and that does worry me.
To your point, their bench only plays 20% of their minutes. That's 353rd in the country. So
Wow.
it's just a group that doesn't see the floor much, which is to me the surprising bit, that it almost feels like Bill Self hasn't developed guys that he's trusted off the bench, which is different than in years past, where it feels like Kansas has waves of guys that just keep coming and coming and coming over and over and over off their bench that can hurt you. That has not been the case. And KJ Adams has been fine, and he's still an elite defender and helps them in so many ways in Big 12 play. But it feels like he and DeJuan Harris, while they're still playing a lot of minutes, have almost kind of deferred at times so much to McCullough and Dickinson that when
Yeah.
they've needed those two to step up, they haven't. And you still love what Adams and Harris can bring, but it really has been a two-man show. And while that can be a fun style to watch, fun for the fan, and that wins in the NBA, that's not the way to be the best team in college basketball. You have a star or two and then surround it with a great supporting cast that can help you win night in, night out. And that has been the area where Kansas has felt like they just have kind of dropped back in the Big 12. Teams have
Right.
caught up as far as the depth goes, whether it's Texas Tech, whether Houston joining the league is taking a step beyond them. That to me is everything you said. I'm with you on just where Kansas has fallen back.
Yeah, I mean they're 4-3, which is the worst conference start they've had in the Bill Self era in Big 12 under Bill Self. So that's pretty shocking. The other thing to keep in mind, we talked a lot about this when it happened. That TCU game was one that you could argue at home they
Mm,
should have lost because of the foul.
good
So I
point.
mean, not to get all the way down the road of doing that what if stuff, but you could make a case they should be 3-4 in conference right now. And it's interesting because McCullough is just really good. Like he's really taken a step up from last year, way more than I would have guessed. And you talk about defensive player of the year, I think he should be in that conversation. It's probably going to be down to Shed and McCullough and maybe Kalkbrenner or like some other guys that I'm sure have
Pulling in,
a
I think
solid
from
case.
UConn does, yeah,
Pulling in, yeah, that's a good one.
that's the
Because of
group.
his rim protection. Yeah. So I mean, that's gonna be really fun to watch these two teams battle in fog on Saturday
Yeah.
because right now Ken Palm's saying Houston should win by 5 points. Now we know Ken Palm loves the Cougars; they're number one on the Ken
But when
Palm
time's the
ranking.
last time you think Ken Palm had Kansas losing at home?
Yeah, right. That's a good call. I mean, it's just that's about as big of a home court advantage as anyone.
Yeah.
And we'll see what they do against Oklahoma State. You said that's a get right game. I totally agree, but also that's like Bill Self's alma mater. So there's been some history there of him giving them a little win here or there. That's the theory at least. But I think they should
I
take
don't think
down
he can
Oklahoma
afford
State.
that this year.
Yeah, no, he doesn't have that luxury. Usually he gives them that and still wins the Big 12 somehow. You can't go 4-4 and win the Big 12, I don't think, especially
No,
how
they
good it
lose
is.
tonight.
But
They lose tonight. That panic button is getting hammered, like
yeah.
sledgehammer through the table to the floor if they drop this one tonight against Oklahoma State as we record on Tuesday. Anything else on kind of the Big 12 before we move on?
Um, I'm impressed with Iowa State. Just a quick tangent on them though. I was watching that game this weekend where Iowa State did beat Kansas, and shout out to them for a good win. But I don't know, pull up their non-conference schedule with me and tell me
Yep.
like again, I don't want to get down this rabbit hole of Big 12 versus ACC or ACC versus the world, but it's sort of just an exercise in trying to understand the net and what the net is sort of rewarding. And I think Iowa State's been good this year, but I just looked at their margin of victory in some of these games. Like they won to start the year against Green Bay 85-44, Lindenwood 102-47, Idaho State. Like I think they are just thumping these teams. Grambling State 314 in Ken Palm, they won 92-37. And I think that's one of the underrated storylines right now is we've talked a lot about the net. And to me, one of the big flaws with a net is I have noticed that scoring margin really plays a factor in it. And I'm not saying Iowa State's not a good team, but I know from what I've been researching on Syracuse, because they're the team I'm covering up here, and they're not anywhere near the bubble right now, but I'm trying to make sense of why their net ranking isn't very good. And one thing with Syracuse is they have no blowout victories this year. And when they lose, they have been thumped. Now, some of those have been games that have been close and then they get ugly down the stretch, but like all their losses are 15 or more points, like really hurting their scoring margin. And they rank very poorly in scoring margin. And I just think that's one of those underrated things. No one's really talking about what is making the net ranking work, what isn't. And it seems like scoring margin is a big emphasis in the net ranking. We don't exactly know the formula because who the heck knows? I mean, it's just tough to make sense of, but I just find it fascinating. It feels like the teams at the top of the net ranking are really benefiting from that scoring margin stat.
Yeah, which then makes all the sense why if you're an Iowa State, you should mix in as many bad teams early on in the year as you can. They
Yeah.
blew out all those teams early on. I mean, and so they were able to mix in a couple of decent wins in their non-conference. So the non-conference strength of the schedule isn't awful. I mean, wins in a neutral set against VCU's okay. You beat your rival Iowa at home, who's like a solid Big Ten team.
And you
They're
clobbered
borderline
them.
tournament.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
you to your
right,
point, you win those games against good teams by a lot. Seems like
right.
that's really helping you out. So I think that's well deduced by Tim Leonard, the detective. He dug deep for that one. Well done.
Yeah.
Um,
Anyway, that's kind of my final thought on the Big 12. I'm very excited though for I think Duke UNC will get the headlines, but Kansas Houston, that might be even more of an intriguing game this weekend.
let's talk a little Big East, huh?
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think before we dive too deep onto the Ed Cooley, Divine Providence, Georgetown saga, and that has now occurred on X. Let's talk briefly about UConn because I was excited to watch UConn Xavier on Sunday, just kind of get a little college basketball fix in before the big football games. And UConn disabled, disarmed, and clobbered Xavier. It was just kind of a over within the first 10 minutes. And it was just another reminder of like, UConn's really good, man. Maybe I haven't given them enough love this year, but that is just a really good basketball team. Despite a lot of different faces from last year's title run, they have enough guys returning, mixed in with rising stars. That's a really, really damn good basketball team.
Well, you talk about Kansas isn't deep. UConn is as deep as they come for a great team, and they made some great additions. And I mean, Cam Spencer has worked out great as a portal addition for them. The really, to me, the key with UConn is Donovan Clingan going to stay healthy? And I think they are just I know they've won without him, so it's not like there's some grand theory here that shows you like his on and off numbers, but I just think he gives them that added layer that says, yeah, this is definitely a national title contender when Clingan is out there. You talked about his defense earlier. And since he's come back, he's kind of easing his way back into it, it seems like. He did have 18 points in this big win over Xavier, but to me, he is so big. It's almost like the way I'm a Celtics fan, and it's like if Kristaps Porzingis stays healthy, it's like, all right, that's a different Celtics team than previous years, right? And Klingon, if they lose him, I just think there's a trickle down effect. They've won without him, but I'd be worried about them in March. And he's just been a little bit fragile injury wise this season. But I love their pieces. I love Tristan Newton. He's playing at an All American level right now. Doesn't wow
Yeah.
you with his stats, but he's just so in control and does like something different each game. Like if you need him to make threes, he'll do that. If you need him to distribute, he'll do that. And they've got a real shot at defending, man. I mean, they're definitely in the national title tier right now.
Yeah, and coming into the year, I do not think I would have had them anywhere near defending. I would have said, yeah, maybe they compete in the Big East, but I probably would have had them definitely behind Marquette in that conference alone, and they have surpassed expectations. I mean, then they've got Cam Spencer and Alex Caravan, just two flamethrowers who are kind of long, lengthy wings that can defend and shoot it. It's a real recipe for a team that can go on that March type of run. And they've kind of claimed the Big East as theirs, which
Yeah.
is, I think, something that I'm feeling like Creighton missed out a little bit. You're feeling like
Marquette.
Marquette haven't quite. Both those teams have been good, but they are clearly right now at like levels below where UConn are at, which is surprising to me from where we maybe thought the conference was going to be at the start of the year.
Yeah, but it's not an easy conference to just claim as your own still. I mean, there's a lot of talent top to bottom in that conference. So props to UConn. I think Dan Hurley should be in the National Coach of the Year conversation again.
Good take.
I'd have to make a short list on that, but off the top of my head, I would give Tommy Lloyd some love for that. I would probably throw Bruce Pearl's Auburn in that conversation. I mean, I'm just trying to think of teams that have kind of exceeded expectations this year, and Auburn slipped
Honestly,
up a little bit
down at
lately.
Chapel Hill, down at Chapel Hill,
Yeah.
you're looking at Hubert Davis, I think should absolutely be in that mix, in my opinion.
Yeah, which is amazing because that was such a big year for him. If they had another down year, the hot seat was very hot, I think, for Hubert, just given the pedigree of that program. So he's turned things around for sure. But yeah, Dan Hurley maybe doesn't even get his due in terms of if you're ranking college basketball tiers right now, because what he's done at UConn and to do it this year, I would say with a less talented roster than last year. And they're just riding high right now. I mean, they've won 8 games in a row.
Well, I would love to talk a little Ed Cooley with you. I
Absolutely.
think this conversation needs to be had. Of course, the kind of start to this is Ed Cooley leaves Providence, his hometown, last year to go to Georgetown. Leaves for a pay upgrade. A lot of rumors swirling around at the time. Had he kind of decided by midseason that he was going to go, but he leaves to go to Georgetown. Georgetown comes back to the AMP, formerly known as the Dunk, in Providence, Rhode Island. Tim, I was in Providence
Oh,
for
wow.
this game. I did not go because my Vermont Catamounts were playing the Bryant Bulldogs just down the road in Smithfield. And I can tell you that town was buzzing on Saturday. Like just walking around that morning, we stayed in downtown Providence and those fans were already jumping for this game morning of. It was kind of cool to just feel like just walking around a little bit. We actually practiced in Providence in their gym on campus on Friday the day before. So just kind of got to get a little feel for how the students were feeling. They were ready to go. And I think the atmosphere delivered. Providence gets the win over Georgetown. Ed Cooley then hears it from the fans, makes some headlines post game just with some statements as far as he felt like Providence should give him a raise for the energy he brought. It was a zoo at the AMP. And I think that before we get into what's developed recently, the atmosphere lived up to the hype. It was really fun to see Providence fans just go so crazy and in a big time win for that team. And credit to Kim English, I think, for getting his guys ready and for coming away with the win.
I thought it was perfect too because I actually thought Providence was probably just going to run them out of the gym. Like if you were looking at the spread and stuff like that, and they did end up winning this game by 8 points, but it was a pretty close game. And Providence or Georgetown rather hung around throughout most of this game. Georgetown really actually does have some talent. They're just, I don't know. It's sort of puzzling to me that they're 1-8 in conference play, but the Big East is a tough league, and I think Ed Cooley will get them right eventually. As far as just the atmosphere and everything, it felt almost even better than the Chris Beard situation somehow when he returned to Texas Tech. And I think the difference there is, yeah, there was vitriol from the Red Raiders fan base towards Chris Beard for sure. But Chris Beard was returning to his alma mater. It is like clearly a better job, all that. And yes, Georgetown has more history than Providence. This is like Ed Cooley had talked so much in his Providence tenure about how this is his dream job and this is the place for him. And then he goes to Georgetown, where it's not like that's his alma mater. I know he had a big relationship with John Thompson, and I think that was a huge part of it is he wanted to kind of do right by his mentor, that type of stuff. But it's not like Georgetown was thriving either. I mean, he's inheriting a situation where he knows they're probably going to be losers for maybe a couple seasons here before he turns this around, a higher ceiling maybe, but still, it's an interesting one. And I thought it was really cool that the game was like kind of close and it made the atmosphere stay in it through the entirety of the game.
So an awesome day Saturday. All I think real fun and games were had. Ed Cooley played the good sport enough where I think we were ready to move on. But then things have kind of hit the fan this week since then. To put it lightly, a documentary was produced by Big East Films, which it has been now a Twitter account and a YouTube page that has been shut down by the Big East because it is unaffiliated with the conference. It then comes out that this documentary was produced by a DePaul fan who has been producing Big East documentaries for the last year plus, and doing it pretty much all by himself, interviewing people via Zoom, kind of a small production. But he puts this hour-long documentary together called Divine Providence, detailing Ed Cooley's kind of rise and then the fall, you could say, as he leaves the school. I had a chance to sit down and watch it yesterday. It
Great.
got
I haven't
taken
watched it,
down.
so I'm very excited.
It
Yeah.
got taken down by YouTube briefly last night, I've heard, but has since been put back up. And so I was able to watch the documentary, and so I have some opinions there. Tim, what have you seen, and just kind of your opinions on what's gone down on social media, kind of since then, with some of the guests on or some of the talking heads in the documentary apparently saying they've backed out of it, they don't want to be in it, they disagree with what's been said in it. It's kind of really messy and dirty.
Yeah, so I don't even know a lot of this. Like you're kind of filling me in as we go here because I've been trying to make sense of it. I was just scrolling through Twitter yesterday and I see Jeff Goodman is it's just getting ratioed to death, right? And I'm like,
Correct.
huh, what's going on here? And
What did Jeff do now?
right, I'm trying to put together the pieces. So I'm sure a lot of people listening have seen the screenshots of the DMs that he sent to, I guess, the DePaul fan you're talking about who basically created the documentary, right? And he
Correct.
is doing this as a hobby, is my understanding. Like it's just sort of something he threw
Just a Big
together.
East basketball fan. He's just doing it because he thinks the story deserves to be told. At
Yeah.
least is what he's put out on Twitter.
So I want to hear your thoughts on how the documentary was, but I just saw
Sure.
the screenshots from Jeff Goodman. I think like a lot of people, I was like, whoa, like this is kind of
So
alarming. Yeah.
I I will say off the top that one of the big kind of Jeff Goodman is threatening some sort of litigation, or at least insinuating that litigation might come down on this guy in some way. One of the big personalities that helps tell the story in the documentary is John Fanta, co-worker with Jeff Goodman at the Field of
Yeah.
68, an outstanding play-by-play broadcaster, does an
Big East
exceptional
ties.
job
Yeah.
covering the Big East. So he is a big part of this documentary, in addition to a lot of Providence fans. The part that I believe that is controversial is at the end of the documentary, they talk about, did Ed Cooley put his house on the market prior to accepting the job? There's kind of the date March 3rd that he had put his house on the market, quote unquote. Providence are still very active in the season. Cooley at the time denied any kind of rumors that he had already accepted the Georgetown gig. Then they detail the rumors that were rampant around college basketball and around Providence that Ed Cooley had been having an affair. And so these are rumors that are addressed. And I can tell you from my point of view, they were rumors that I heard last spring. They are rumors that I've heard since then, that this was a reason why Ed Cooley was, again, all rumors, all speculation, getting
Sure.
quote unquote forced out of town. Those rumors were then kind of discussed throughout this documentary, especially at the end. Is this something that actually happened? I think that is an area that maybe John Fanta might have taken. I don't want to have any part of this. He did not give any quotes regarding that side of things and the very unreported portions of this documentary. I'm wondering, and I'm believing then that that is probably the part that he did not like that his name was involved in this documentary, and tried to kind of walk back his own involvement, saying that at least it's kind of been talked about that whoever this is feeling like they were quote unquote tricked into doing the documentary. And that's when things really unraveled, with some of the Field of 68 guys going after this dude. Big East Twitter blows up again with Ed Cooley's name getting tossed around as far as, did this thing actually happen around Ed? And so it just became a crazy day yesterday around Big East basketball that I liked the documentary personally. I thought it told a great little story of
Yeah.
giving both sides of why Ed might have wanted to leave, what he could build at Georgetown. His relationship with Big John was very well told throughout. So it's a much ado about nothing, just a really fun day for me personally, kind of from the outside, but it definitely got a little bit nasty yesterday on Twitter.
So you didn't think that they didn't do it? Like, were they clear in saying this is speculation and that
There
type of
was
stuff?
one other talking head who was like, why else would he have left? This obviously happened. Everybody else, the fans, the students, they gave good perspective from Georgetown people as far as like, This
Yeah.
was definitely out there. People were discussing this as like maybe this is a reason that Cooley's leaving, but we can't say for sure if that's the reason that he's gone or not. But it was a rumor last spring that that was maybe why
Sure.
Cooley's leaving town, and it had been talked about in February, in March, that he might be kind of coaching with one foot already out the door. That was absolutely part of the story last year.
Yeah, I'm curious, and I don't know if he's done something on Twitter or anything, but I'm interested to hear from Jeff Goodman next on kind of his side of this because just from my personal vantage point, like Goodman has been great to me, and he's a guy that I respect a lot, and
Same.
I don't know exactly what happened here, but when you read the screenshots, you're like, huh, like this is interesting. It feels like you're missing something. So obviously, just because he's been good to me doesn't rule out that he did something wrong here. But I'm curious to see what happens next. It probably will blow over and we
Right.
won't even talk about it next week on the pod. It will be on to the next story. But it's an interesting one for sure. It's like a Twitter, it's everything that is Twitter is coming together here, you know, and it's just escalating quickly.
Well said. I don't have a whole lot else there. I just want a Duke UNC pick from you on the way out. Can't wait to
Yeah.
watch the biggest game of the year on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the Tar Heels. I think I have to. They're just rolling right now. Duke got a little lucky to get that win against Clemson, I thought. A little controversial at the end. They did play well last
Very.
night. I think Duke is sort of rounding into form because they are freshman laden, but overall, I think UNC has the answer for Kyle Filipowski. You can put Harrison Ingram on him, you can put Baycott on him, and RJ Davis is I've been so impressed by him. It's amazing. Like Caleb Love is thriving, and then RJ Davis is thriving even more than you could have imagined. Like he's hovering with 50, 40, 90, and it's really incredible stuff right now.
I'm with you. That game's going to deliver. I've got UNC on Saturday. Tim, thanks so much for sitting down on this Tuesday afternoon. Hope everybody tunes in on YouTube or catches us on social media as well. For Tim Leonard, I'm Brian McLaughlin. This has been Just College Hoops.